Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. There you go. That's the button I was looking for. Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 30th, 2023. Time for another Halloween, but not yet. Not until tomorrow. It's almost there. But once you get that clock rolling over to the 3 on 30, well, the anticipation... Well, okay. They've been had Halloween candy in the stores since August. So, okay. The anticipation game almost over. And big night. If you're a black cat, huge, right? Witches, whatever. Zombies, for that matter, but I don't know that they know the difference. So, exciting moments. My kids are past loving Halloween stage. And we have our biggest Halloween fan is our favorite production assistant who is away on business at the moment, and so not clinking, clanking, having diner sounds going on in the background, which is too bad today, this week, for a number of reasons. Well, one, of course, being away for Halloween when you're a huge fan of answering the doors for the little tykes in their costumes. So that'll be missed. And, of course, we don't have the diner sound effects going on for, I guess we could have been doing a story. I didn't put it aside, but I thought maybe Greg did. I'll have to check and see if it's in the roundup or whatever, but okay, we have a new speaker, as you know, and so that's going to be in the roundup. But I guess what everybody's been sharing on social media today is that, is it the New York Times that did it or the Washington Post? Which of the papers of record decided to go on down to what is allegedly Speaker Johnson's hometown and basically did what somebody described as something that looked like a parody of Trump diner journalism, right? Going to the local diner and talking to voters about how they still support Trump. Except, who's saying this? Okay, Louis Kirsten, as it happens, saying it reads like a parody of the Trump diner journalism. In this small town masquerading as a city, a mention of newly elected House Speaker Mike Johnson during the lunchtime rush at Strawn's Eat Shop 2, home of the Icebox Pie, very homey sounding, right, drew an interruption. And this attached to a retweet of Kevin Cruz's discussion about it, saying, if you thought Let's Ask About Trump at a diner full of Trump fans was bad reporting, pull up a seat for Let's Ask About Mike Johnson at a diner where his own mother is holding court. I did not realize that. And then invoking the name of, well, I mean, I guess people say this, right? Jesus Christ, WashingtonPost.com. I'm embarrassed for you, or embarrassed for you. He's stressing the for, not, I don't know. Okay. Well, at any rate, I had no plans to read this story. However, it is something everybody's talking about today, and they point up a good, it's a good example, right, of some very, very bad reporting styles that continue on. Also, I was curious. I'm a little bit curious about the story just because I wondered whether, do people in Shreveport think it's weird that Mike Johnson doesn't sound Louisianan at all? And I don't know what Mike Johnson's bio is. There's plenty of members born elsewhere, and they don't sound like where they're from because they moved there, either as adults or whatever. And what do I care? I mean, I'm not Virginian by birth, right? Lots of people move around. It's not a big deal. Newt Gingrich never sounded like he was from Georgia, and he wasn't. He was from Pennsylvania, and he selected Georgia because there was an extraordinarily strong, chance of being elected as a Republican from Georgia. He went there for that reason. And maybe he did the same thing. I don't really know. Or maybe Shreveport doesn't have accents. Maybe he was educated elsewhere. I don't really know what the deal is. But he doesn't sound like he's from there. And neither does Bernie Sanders sound like he's from Vermont. So, it's a thing. It happens. I'm just curious about that. But I'd be even more curious if it turned out that he was born and raised in Shreveport. I thought I saw somebody say it was Shreveport, and still sounded like that, which would be odd. But, there's a lot of things that he sounds like. I don't know, like, for instance, today, Amanda Marcotte writes a whole article that he sounds like an incel. So that sounds interesting, too, and maybe we want to touch on that at some point later on. So anyway, like I said, Halloween coming. We got some candy here. The weather forecast has changed a little bit. We bought with rain in mind, and now it looks like we're going to have clear weather levels of candy on hand because all the kids will be out. So, all right, that's the exciting news for today. It's almost November, and of course, that will be the month of the next government shutdown. We'll talk about that tomorrow with Joan. Right now, Greg is here, and he's got candy probably, and if you ask nicely, you might even get an advance on Halloween. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Oh, we got everything. We got wax lips,
Ooh.
and we got those little
That's a lost
sugar
art.
juice in little bottles that look like Coca-Cola bottles,
I like those.
and
I
little
don't get
dots
those
on
anymore.
strips of paper.
You're kidding. now it sounds like did you rob a Cracker Barrel country store?
This is
is a
the
great
candy
idea.
store that we used to have back when I was growing up. in
Yeah. Oh, that's I'm going
But
to
I
your
don't-
house.
I don't
They
sound
got
like I'm
full size
from
candy
Brooklyn.
bars.
Brooklyn, because I went to college in Boston, so
Oh,
I don't sound like I'm from Brooklyn anymore.
right. Yeah, that's not right.
Yeah, I got your
don't-
accent right here.
It happens all the time. It's just they tend. Well, I don't know. I imagine Shreveport to be one of those cities that gets sensitive about that. And you don't sound
I think
like you're
he
from
got
around
it,
here, but
lawed out of him when he went to law school.
that's probably it. And a lot of it
That's
happens
law
to a
school.
lot of
That's
people.
LAWD.
Oh, like divinity school?
Well,
Is that what you mean?
He's
Okay.
into it.
Yeah.
So I got a bunch of
very much
stuff
so.
on
All right.
Mike Johnson. None of it good.
Well, you don't want to get a lot of stuff on Johnson's, but all right. Take a bath. What do you have?
Who was making Johnson jokes? Oh,
Everybody. I hope.
Yeah. Well, everybody. In the Senate.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Was it Fetterman?
Yeah, Fetterman
That's right.
was.
You sent me that. Everybody. Can I tell you the GOP loves a big Johnson? I guess.
Yeah, something like that.
You
So
sent me, yeah.
this is from Vox, Ben Jacobs. Lord of the Flies, the House Chaotic Next Era, explained.
Okay. I love an explainer.
Sounded apt, so I thought that was a good one.
It's Vox. It's an explainer.
It's a Vox explainer. New House Speaker Mike Johnson faces a long to-do list in a caucus with short patience for compromise. But that's the thing. It's interesting. There was actually a poll I saw over the weekend. I had it in the Piner Roundup, I think, on Saturday.
Okay.
Or maybe Friday, but after the show that I did last on Thursday, showing that sick and tired of the mess, Republican voters were more willing to compromise on things with the new speaker relative to the way they were a week ago, a month ago, 2 months ago.
You're
So
right.
I
They're
thought
tired.
that was quite interesting because, people have said, well, those stupid Democrats, they didn't vote for Kevin McCarthy, and now they got Mike Johnson. And
Yes.
that's just wrong at so many levels. Let's go over some of those.
All right.
First of all, Mike Johnson is probably personally worse, but institutionally better than Kevin McCarthy ever was.
Oh.
And by that I mean,
Yeah. What do you mean?
whatever you elect a speaker to be, whoever that speaker is, the problem with the Republicans is their conference, not the speaker.
Right.
So you can replace Kevin McCarthy with Mike Johnson, and institutionally it's the same. As a matter of fact, if you replace Kevin McCarthy, who is supporting the people in the 8 that ousted him by trying to boost them, to give you an idea how stupid McCarthy was,
Oh.
it's
All right.
unlikely institutionally Kevin McCarthy is going to have his mistakes repeated by Mike Johnson,
Oh. Oh well.
right?
Does he have other ones?
Well, he'll make his own mistakes. He's
good.
new at the job. He doesn't really know it. He's got George Santos expulsion,
Right.
Israel
Yes,
funds,
true.
Ukraine funds, and closing the government down on his plate to get to right away. And it's not really clear how that's going to happen with what has to be looked at as a relatively weak speaker. But because the Republican conference is sick and tired of the sick and tired stuff, they're probably more willing to compromise and give Johnson a little bit of leeway in his honeymoon than they were ready to give Kevin McCarthy at this particular point in time. So whatever you think of him personally, and there's a lot of bad things to think about him personally, he doesn't, as Speaker, have the power to pass laws and get them through the Senate and the White House.
No, he needs help.
Works. So institutionally, he's restrained, regardless of what his horrible views are.
Yes. And traditionally, he won't even be voting, but he might because their margins are so thin.
The power of the Speaker is to get stuff to the floor, for the most part, and then everything else. But it's also the ability to raise money and thereby sway votes because you can raise money. Right. It's not clear he can raise money, so I don't know how many votes he can actually sway. And as far as getting stuff to the floor, those things that I mentioned have to come to the floor regardless, so that's not really up to him. So I think that institutionally, how is he any worse than McCarthy, and maybe a little bit better, regardless of the fact that personally, I find his views on, for example, women abhorrent. Yes. But he doesn't have the power to do anything about it.
Thankfully not for the moment. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who think the same thing in the Republican conference, and there's always the danger that they'll get even more of them. But, that's our job to prevent that.
That's why voters, you shouldn't give them a majority.
Yeah, you shouldn't. And they barely have one now, even though you cheated in order to get one. So you probably don't really have majority support in the country, and you should shut up and get out of the way.
Right. Pat Fallon
vote,
of Texas expressed
just count yourselves once. Yeah.
That Johnson, whom he praised as having a lot of likability, authenticity, honest, and talented, would be successful, in his view, if Mike Johnson succeeds, America succeeds. We have a functioning House and a functioning government, and,
hand in hand.
He's an example of somebody who might be willing to compromise regardless. I mean, if Johnson goes and talks to McConnell says to Johnson, as he has, this Israel and Ukraine stuff has to pass, and Mike Johnson comes out sounding like a rhino. It's guys like Pat Fallon who might compromise to at least get stuff done, because it's good for America and it's good for, the party.
Maybe.
But Ben Jacobs then goes on to write, and again, it could be argued under these circumstances that McCarthy's debt ceiling deal in the spring is a win, and the result prompted an immediate right-wing rebellion. So, you never know, because that's what Johnson has to deal with.
Yeah.
But he's already getting slightly more breathing room from Matt Gaetz, who's the leader of the effort to oust McCarthy and has been an implacable opponent of aid to Ukraine. Implacable.
Something.
Unmovable.
Yes.
Gaetz let some wiggle room about whether it should receive a vote, saying there should definitely be separate questions.
Okay.
So whether they bring them together, bring them separately is unclear. But whatever criticism there was of the old ways of Washington, at least everybody knew where they were. Everybody was working with the same playbook. All that's frayed. So the House institutionalism is a lot weaker than it was. And if it's the institutionalism that's holding Johnson together as not all that different, we'll just have to see how much it actually frays.
Okay. I mean, it may be that they just go through a series of speakers, each of whom does that thing
Andy
that
Warhol
needs to
thing,
be done.
15 minutes of fame. Get
right,
your vote,
well, for
get
a
your
while,
one vote on the thing that needs to pass, get the next one.
Yeah.
Throw them out, get the next one. Get the one
definitely-
vote on the thing you need to pass, get it passed, throw them out. That's fine.
Everybody has
We
a
can do that. Who
honeymoon for
cares?
one vote. Okay. There's 200 of them. They can all be speaker.
Well, there's 200 things we can pass, so that's great.
Yeah.
And that's why, you might argue, I would argue, that throwing Kevin McCarthy out exposes what already existed, and if anything, puts us in an ever so slightly better position, certainly not a worse position than we were before. So why not
Matt
hold out
Gaetz,
and withhold your
super
vote?
genius.
Why
Yeah.
should you vote for Kevin McCarthy? He's an insurrectionist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they all are. So it's one at a time. But
No, Emmer wasn't. That's why
right. Well,
Republicans
that guy.
didn't want him, and that's why Democrats are ready to vote for him. And the fact that they didn't accept Tom Emmer because he accepted the 2020 election just exposed the Republicans to what they are. And I think that's, on balance, probably a long-term good thing.
Yeah. Well, argument to be made at some point that remaining in the party will just make you an insurrectionist by extension. But
Well, that's
not
okay.
yet.
The voters have a chance, like in New York, to throw some of these guys out.
That's right.
That'll
Okay.
teach 'em.
Because
Because after all, the so-called moderates voted for the insurrectionists.
Yeah.
Oh, I had one for you.
Me?
I put aside. I thought you'd find
How
it
did you know
interesting.
I was going to be here? All right.
Chances I heard from some friends you hang out this space.
Yeah.
So this is from HuffPost, and it had the very intriguing title, Whatever Happened to Ken Buck?
Whoa. Okay. Yeah. What did happen?
What happened to
I'd like
Ken
to go
Buck's
find
election
out.
integrity stand?
Yeah. That.
So-
we were worried about that.
Right?
Okay.
Here's what happened during this month's speaker battle.
He forgot.
For those of you who don't remember why we're bringing this up, Buck first confronted Jim Jordan and Representative Steve Scalise, Republican Louisiana, Dave Duke without the baggage, whereas
Right.
Mike Johnson is Steve Scalise without the baggage, about the 2020 election during a closed Republican meeting in the Capitol basement, where Jordan refused to respond directly to his question about whether Biden had won fair and square.
Right. Okay.
Because they gave indirect answers, Buck said he voted present. And he wouldn't vote for either one of them. If we don't have the moral clarity to decide whether President Biden won or not, we don't have the moral clarity to rule in this country, period, Buck said
Right.
afterwards.
Period.
That's about as clear a statement as you could ask from a Republican.
Yeah. So get rid of it.
So a week later, Scalise withdraws. Jordan becomes a nominee.
Right.
Buck meets with Jordan. Buck
Yeah.
said Jordan was more knowledgeable and involved in the whole challenging the election that day, and Jordan's answers hadn't allayed his concerns.
So what did he do?
Buck was one of the 20 Republicans who voted against Jordan in his first of 3 failed ballots on the House floor.
Okay.
After Jordan had suggested to his colleagues that the House should empower Patrick McHenry,
McHenry. I forgot about
Buck
that
worked
guy.
against
All
that.
right.
2 sources said Buck approached a group of progressives and told them Democrats should stay away from the temporary speaker proposal because it would keep Jordan's speaker bid alive.
All right.
Because McHenry would be the speaker, and then Jordan could run again in a couple of months. And Buck said he
see.
didn't want that. And Buck said, that's not how it happened.
Oh. All right.
Which means that's how it happened.
Oh.
After
I got
Jordan
whiplash
withdrew his
here.
speaker bid, Republicans regrouped and settled on Tom Emmer, who himself withdrew after just 4 hours. Buck wasn't the problem there.
Yeah. Not even a vote.
And then Republicans realized they needed a relative newcomer who hadn't made too many enemies, so they settled on Johnson. Buck
Byron
supported
Donalds is right
Johnson,
there.
even though the Louisiana Republican was the lead name on a Supreme Court brief
Well,
seeking to throw out the presidential election.
yeah.
But Buck said the same thing I said to you.
Oh.
That's absolutely how you challenge an election. You go to court. You win. you lose. That's how it works.
Yeah. Sort of.
That's
I mean-
not an insurrection.
I guess it's different. Certainly Johnson thinks so. There's some blurring of the line. You know, we can talk about that. But yeah, I see what you mean.
Jordan's case was totally different because of his January 6th involvement, which included multiple phone calls with Trump that day. There's no way he's voting for him. So Buck makes the distinction, perhaps you think without a difference, between, getting involved legally and, getting involved otherwise. It's interesting because I saw a commentator talk about the difference in the Fani Willis case, the RICO case,
Okay.
between Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis on the one hand, and Ken Chesbrough on the other.
Okay. What is it?
That Sidney Powell and Jenna Ellis were working on getting fraudulent votes, whereas Kenneth Chesbrough was working on fraudulent legal theory.
Okay.
They're not quite the same thing. Chesbrough didn't go around the country with Rudy Giuliani. Chesbrough didn't strong-arm people locally to do stuff.
Yeah.
Right? So
well,
one is theory,
I
the other's
see.
practice. And basically what Ken Buck is saying is that Mike Johnson, it was theory, whereas Jim Jordan and Scalise were practice, especially Jordan.
I see.
And so in his head, he doesn't have any trouble separating it. I
Well,
just
that's
thought it was
'cause
an
it's his
interesting
head.
distinction that he made.
I think so. I think it's backfill after, it works as backfill on that level, I guess. Okay, and now I can see the distinction. But I believe your question was, not yours, but Ken Buck, you asked, did Biden win the election fair and square?
Yeah,
Is
Johnson
Mike
still can't
Johnson
say
going
yes,
to?
so
Yeah,
that's a
right.
problem.
So he changed his question.
Or he didn't ask that question.
Right, or something like that. And he asked a different question so that he could get to yes.
Yeah. and basically what it really comes down to is I hate Jordan. And I don't really hate Johnson yet.
Right.
So, okay, fine.
I think that's the best real explanation for it. It didn't really have anything to do with his...
But in court,
Yeah.
that distinction between what Ken Jesborough was involved with and what Ellis and Sidney Powell were involved with, on the other hand, is actually going to be important, I think. And so I do think Buck has a point. And again, I think that there's a difference between supporting lawsuits and showing up in the Capitol and trashing Pelosi's office.
Yes. And Johnson would very much like for you to think so, too, and says as much, and says, I didn't, I condemn the violence of January 6th. You should have been in court with me instead, even though that wouldn't really pass Buck's first test. But okay, so Buck changed his test. That's his problem, not Johnson's problem. Although what is interesting, I did discover going into the weekend that do you remember Mo Brooks? Mm-hmm. He did a lot of things, including putting a tourniquet on Steve Scalise. There was that.
Wearing a flak jacket to whatever January 6th stuff because how would he know it was an issue?
And he had a series of emails with Trump and whatever the name, I can't remember the name of Trump's aide, actually the one who ended up in the conversation about the stolen documents at Mar-a-Lago, where he waved around the General Milley's memo and who spilled the beans on that. Yeah. So anyway, Brooks has a series of, it was a brief splash in the news, emails between him. You remember when Mo Brooks said, we need pardons? A bunch of Republicans, and Matt Gaetz among them needs a pardon.
Yeah.
Well, I read a story on those emails, and apparently the content of those emails is, hey, I'm writing the assistant at President Trump's suggestion, but I originally wrote to President Trump at Matt Gaetz's suggestion saying, we need pardons for all the Republicans who signed Mike Johnson's crazy-ass brief. We all might need presidential pardons. I thought, that's an interesting perspective. I've never heard of anybody asking for a pardon for signing a legal brief, and I wondered, I'm sure Mike Johnson thinks, well, I wasn't an insurrectionist. I was fighting in court. Yeah, and the people who co-signed your brief think they need pardons for it. That's
did Mike
unusual.
Johnson feel like he needed a pardon?
I don't know.
That would be really the key there.
Yeah, that would be how he feels.
Now that we know
about
to ask that question, we didn't know to ask that
question.
Right.
But no one has asked that question yet. Now, I'm sure he would say, well, no, of course I didn't need a pardon. I was merely arguing in court. It's interesting that a fairly significant contingent of Republicans just wanted to be sure for some reason, or I don't know how you come to the conclusion that you need a pardon for signing up an amicus brief, but maybe I need to read that brief again.
Yeah, maybe. So Mark Jacob, who is ex-Chicago Trib editor, had on Twitter, which I've stopped calling X because what for?
Yeah,
it's
what's
Twitter.
The point? You always have to say, the old Twitter, right?
Yeah, formerly known as Prince.
Exactly.
12 questions for radical House Speaker Mike Johnson. A thread.
Oh.
1. You were active in the effort to nullify Biden's election. Please cite your evidence of widespread election fraud.
Okay.
Number 2. You're a lawyer. If the case for election fraud was so strong, why did Team Trump lose 60-plus lawsuits?
Yes.
Number 3.
I know it's
how can you say the U.S. is a Christian nation? Haven't you read the Constitution?
Oh. Well, it's wrong. You're all pre-wrong.
Original intent was to write it differently.
Right. Exactly.
And I go by original intent.
Yeah.
And how do I know it was supposed to be written differently? Because God told me.
Right. It's easy. So much easier when he's cheating on the exam, but God is telling him.
I mean, directly. He wrote it in my breakfast cereal. He wrote it in my alphabets.
Thou shalt. What is that? Oh, I'm out of milk.
You want to keep fraudster George Santos in the House because the margin of GOP, the majority, is thin. Isn't that the kind of moral relativism you'd otherwise condemn?
Oh.
And he does. And that's an issue. And he's got to vote on it. And he doesn't want to vote on it, but he has to vote on it because it's a privileged resolution.
Though, speaking of relativism, he did tell the New Yorkers, do what's right for New York.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'll block you.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy.
All right. No problem.
As a lawyer, you represented a Bible-based theme park that said the Earth is only 6,000 years old and Noah's Ark was a real boat with dinosaurs on it. Scientists believe dinosaurs went extinct around 65 million years ago. You see the problem here.
What? No.
Do you think they're wrong?
No. Yes.
Number 6, you've said gay deviant sexual intercourse is dangerous. Is that opinion based on personal experience?
Oh, well, no. Next.
You've said states have always maintained the right to discourage sexual conduct outside marriage, so should hetero premarital sex be illegal?
Oh, he'll say yes to that.
Well, we'll get him on record. Why did you say the U.S. needs to go back to 18th century values? Did you forget that included slavery and the subjugation of women?
No.
Or were those the values you were referring to?
Now you're talking. Yeah. They're good questions. I mean, he'll answer them too, I bet.
Right. Number 9, why do you support a politician who cheated on all 3 of his wives and paid hush money to a porn star?
It's cool.
Number 10, does your acceptance of $240,000 in campaign contributions from the oil and gas industry have anything to do with your denial that human behavior is causing climate change?
Yes.
Number 11, in 2016, you said one of the causes of mass shootings was no-fault divorce. Can you explain?
No.
All right, number 12. This is my favorite of the whole bunch. If you think God made you speaker, do you think God made Nancy Pelosi speaker too?
Oh. That is an interesting question. Yes. To punish America.
Why did she make Nancy Pelosi the greatest speaker of all time? Why is she the goat and you're not?
Oh. Sense of humor. I assume.
Anyway, I thought those were great questions.
Yeah, they are. I think I know what all his answers are.
But next week on Meet the Press, they'll ask all of them. We'll have Mark Jacob on all
You think?
Answer them.
I don't know. I think no one will answer any. Ask him any.
No,
different
I don't think
questions.
they'll ask any of them.
What's on the menu at your mom's diner? Oh, well, Okay, that he'll answer. He's got answers for all
Why
of
do
them.
the people at your mom's diner like you so much?
Oh, that is a good question. She may be poisoning their food if they don't say they do. All right, we'll be right back in 2 minutes with more answers, if not questions. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Maybe we do have more questions after all, and probably fewer answers than we thought when we went into the break. But okay, what's next, Greg? What's on the list?
Well, this was sparked by a Charles Franklin, who's a pollster, Wisconsin.
He's a Wisconsin guy?
Yeah.
Crucial.
Marquette University Law poll.
Okay.
And he posted 4 tweets, 4 steps down the rabbit hole. Are you coming, Alice? He said. We all know Biden's job approval is underwater with more disapproval than approval. It's worse than it seems. Over 40% strongly disapprove, while only 15% strongly approve. But there's more somewhat approve than somewhat disapprove.
Okay.
So despite the underwater approval, the vote's nearly even with Trump. And this is leaned vote with if you had to choose stuff.
Okay.
So the punchline is, despite the low approval, Biden dominates with strong and somewhat approves, and Trump dominates as strongly with strong disapprove, and he splits somewhat disapprove with a slight lead. So there's a lot of people who are sort of unhappy with how things are, but would still vote for Biden. We know that. We think more of them will come home as the election comes and the campaign kicks in. And, the worries are, well, what if it doesn't? Sure.
Well, sure. Yeah, that's...
Absolutely. That's what you're supposed to worry about. That's what a campaign is for. You're supposed to work on exactly those things. In fact, Nate Cohen has a piece in the New York Times this morning about exactly that. What about the low-intensity voters? Biden won them in 2020, but Trump is tying him at least now. Now, these are the people that didn't show up for the midterms, but what if they show up in the fall? Well, we don't know if they'll show up in the fall. If they do show up in the fall, we don't know who they're going to vote for. We only know what would happen if the election were held today. And with the Mideast war and prices being a little bit too high, now is probably not the best time for Biden to have an election, but the election isn't today, and so we don't know what any of that means.
It is in Virginia.
So Adam Bass was looking at that, journalist.
Okay.
And says, this is a really good thread on why Biden's tied with Trump despite awful approval ratings. Biden's leading with voters who don't like him, but don't strongly dislike him. And the question is, do the voters show up, and is it enough to score an electoral college win against Trump? So from what polls have suggested, most people would go to the polls if the election were held. Well, what happens if the option of a third party goes away? And I think they will go away because I think a lot of the people who are claiming to run are idiots.
Oh, well, all right.
All right, just at the end, they're not going to attract a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
So, interesting in terms of what's going on these days.
Yes.
Now, separately, a journalist friend of mine, Joe Lawrence, had a piece that I included in the Pundit Roundup that I'm not really going to go over today because it's not my thing.
Okay.
Okay, it's called Taylor Swift is the Antidote We Need in the Age of Donald Trump, basically because she's smart and she's tough. She's like Dolly Parton for a different generation.
That could be. I don't know if it
and that's
fixes
great.
anything, but all right.
And she said, thank you for writing it and said nice things about me for including it. Yep. And so I'm going to include a different piece of hers that just went up.
Okay.
That I didn't put in the Pundit Roundup. Maybe I will Wednesday. But this is called Joe Biden's Surprising Focus on the Future.
Ah, now this seems to make more sense. It's about
for
Joe
our,
Biden,
for our
Taylor Swift.
For our space. For
right.
Our,
yeah,
for
old
my
people.
space with Kagro X.
Right.
Speaking of Dolly Parton and wax lips, Joe Biden's surprising focus on the future, from infrastructure to democracy to this week's action on AI. That would be artificial intelligence.
Yes.
He's laying a foundation for coming generations to build on. So he's our oldest president, as everybody keeps saying, but he's also, despite and possibly because of his age, an unusually forward-looking one.
Huh.
I've had this thought often throughout this administration, and it struck me again when word leaked that Biden would be signing a sweeping executive order on artificial intelligence. Not the first one, but based on a draft order it obtained, Politico deemed it the most significant single effort to impose national order on a technology that shocked many people with its rapid growth. And like so much else Biden has prioritized, the AI order is geared toward a better, safer, more livable world for today's children and generations to come. It's the latest in a series of Biden administration moves to meet U.S. challenges that former President Trump largely ignored, failed at, or made worse.
Okay.
Again, a reminder, and I've seen a lot of people on Twitter and on Threads and on Blue Sky.
Oh. And
point this out. Look, all you people complaining about, but I'll never vote for him, for this, for that, for anything else. Donald Trump, take your issue, whatever it is. I promise you he'll make it worse.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty strong premise.
I mean, it's such a weird vibe here in terms of trying to understand who and which voices you're supposed to listen to. If the polls are noting that there's low-intensity voters who aren't really that engaged, how do the polls just find them and get them engaged with the poll?
That is an interesting question. You go
so how do you know
low-intensity
really,
bars?
Hitting the people you think you're hitting in terms of describing them. Uh-huh. So, right, take elections, right? We got elections coming up.
Please.
Like next week?
Right.
Week from Tuesday?
Yes.
How is it that everybody's all jacked up and really amped and it's all really super important about abortion in Ohio?
Well,
because they have one of those, referenda.
Yes. Well, there's all sorts of referenda about the referenda, so yeah.
Well, that one was already, the referenda about the referenda was already done. So
Yes.
now it's the actual referenda.
It's just exciting because people love referenda.
And yet, are you trying to tell me, so people in Michigan are just, and Arizona, and especially Virginia,
Why?
are just like, who cares? Abortion, whatever. That's so 2022.
No.
They're excited
we
about it
saying?
in Ohio, but not in Virginia. Virginia's got an election next week.
Sure.
Are we saying that's not going to be on the agenda?
I don't know. They
In
keep
fact, it
knocking
is
on my
on the
door
agenda because
saying it's on the
Youngkin put it
agenda.
on the agenda.
Yes.
He wants it to be a referenda on a 15-week abortion ban.
Yes.
He wants banning abortion on the menu. You're supposed to go out and vote on that.
In the diner.
And
right.
we think it's important in Ohio, but not in Virginia?
No. I don't. I'm not in Ohio. I don't even know if maybe it's not important in Ohio.
Is it important in
I'm
Virginia?
not there. Yes. Like I said, they will not stop knocking on my door about it. I have 15,000
Then-
pounds of mail about it. Yes.
Right? So let's wait until Wednesday. I
This
hope by
Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Next Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay.
A week from Wednesday.
To-
And figure out just how important this was.
Okay.
And then and only then can we start talking about, well, Biden's approval rating is underwater. Well, if they keep voting for Democrats, I don't really care what his approval is.
I guess that's true. There's a long streak of surprising outcomes in red states about abortion questions. And,
But all of a sudden it's going to
think-
go away
Yeah, I don't think
because
so.
some other issue comes up.
I don't know what it is.
Well, could be
Israel,
Israel, Hamas. It could be something else a week and a half from now. It could be Ukraine. I mean, this stuff doesn't go away, and people still vote on it. And the idea that the issue of the moment, the one that gets clicks, is the one that's going to decide the November 2024 election, is not as stupid as that Washington Post editorial from last week.
Oh. That was the champ.
But still pretty stupid.
All right. Well, there's no missing it here in Virginia. It's at least
That's what I'm thinking. There's no missing it in Virginia.
now,
what
our
I think is
district.
interesting in Virginia is the fact that Youngkin and the Republicans have decided that whatever Trump says about early voting being bad, early
Yes.
voting is good.
Right.
So they've really worked hard on getting Republicans to early vote. And they've upped their game. They've gotten about 3% more early vote than they did in similar years, although it's not exactly easy to find a similar year. Because the last couple of elections, were 2022 was a congressional election, 2020 was a presidential election. It's really hard to find a off year, not even governor election to compare it to.
That's true. There's every reason to believe
It's an
the
off-off
turnout
year.
will be low.
Yeah, it should
of
be
that.
low. It is low.
I mean, I don't want it to be low.
So what does that mean?
Do I?
Tom Bonnier, who analyzes early vote, target early, that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
looked at the data and said, we really can't tell. Looks like a close election.
Okay.
And the problem is, the Republicans have succeeded in getting their early vote up a little bit, but we don't know if they're stealing from Election Day, the perennial early vote question. And at the same time, we don't know how much persuasion matters. Look at the red states like Kansas and maybe Ohio. So just because a Republican shows up to the polls with abortion being an issue, we don't know how they vote.
Right. We didn't know what was going to happen in Kansas.
Yeah. So for those reasons, Virginia is an extremely difficult election to predict. Other than that, it'll be close. Chaz
Alrighty.
Nuttycombe and Dave Wasserman, of all people, think that Democrats probably have an edge in having a tiny majority in the House and Senate, House, State Senate, but they don't know.
We will. have
Dave
to wait.
Wasserman has not seen enough.
Okay. Right. And then we'll move into the
But, in
Democrats
discussing
one.
it,
So it was
it
fraud
bothers me that
version
people
of
think
things.
abortion is such a big issue in Ohio, but it's not a big issue in Virginia. Folks, it is a big issue in Virginia.
It's a big issue, everywhere. But I can tell you, I've been here on the ground. I mean, I'm in Northern Virginia where they're gonna concentrate on that, hoping to turn out Democrats. But then this is where the voters are, Democrats and
But
Republicans.
it's not a
So
statewide election, so it matters in every district.
yeah, It does. I mean, yeah, there's no statewide offices but where, the entire legislature is being reelected. So everybody has some voting to do.
Yeah, but we're not trying to see who gets the most votes. We're trying to see who gets the most delegates, so to speak.
Yep. Oh, it's real.
And senators.
That's the name. That's the name they use is delegates. So perfectly correct.
Wasn't that clever? I worked that in there.
Yeah. It works. And I guarantee you people are definitely talking about it. And the theme here for voters that they're trying to reach to bring out as Democrats, the theme has been Virginia is the last state in the South that hasn't passed one of these extreme bans. And Youngkin wants to change that and tie us more to the deep South than anything else. And
it's one of the northernmost southern states, and it's one of the bluest southern states. Mm-hmm. But it's absolutely positively a southern state. If you don't know anything about history, you should look it up.
Right. This despite the fact that we just melted the Robert E. Lee statue.
Yes.
But okay.
But Richmond had a role.
Yep. And although this was the Charlottesville statue, so there's still a Richmond statue.
Well, I'm just saying, But, back in the 1860s, Richmond had a role.
It did. And, it lost. But all right.
It did.
And now it has a statue in a Federal Reserve Bank. How odd.
So Lee has a statue, but Jeff Davis doesn't.
Right. True.
Well, in Charlottesville, Lee doesn't have a statue.
Right. Okay.
Melted down.
Yep.
Melted down, and the material is being used for a work of art.
Yes. So far, I don't know whether the work of art is the giant ingot that they made out of it. That would be an interesting work of art all by itself. But
well, if they made a giant ingot out of it, then Robert Menendez would steal it.
That's the problem.
That's
I need it in my house in case communists come.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit them over the head with it.
Right. I'm just holding it for you.
I'm borrowing it. I was going to give it back. This is it's a possibility.
Anyway,
Okay.
Jill Lawrence goes on to say, infrastructure is a major contrast. Trump talked about it incessantly, but never closed a deal. On China, Biden signed the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Trump didn't do anything. China's edge on AI, clean energy, and rapidly growing fields might be addressed by some of the infrastructure stuff. The tariffs Trump imposed are largely still in effect under Biden, who's trying to collect on a Trump deal that required China to buy an extra $200 billion of American exports. But they reneged on that, so everything
Weird.
Trump told the farmers he was going to do, they didn't do.
But he already gave them money, so that's it.
So focusing on what Biden actually is going to do, again, it can be frustrating to think, Biden's not a bad president. Yes, but he did this thing that I don't like. Mm-hmm. What did he do? He's old.
Oh.
Yeah, I know.
Well,
so
now
it's
there's
him versus somebody else. Again, you go back to that focus group that Sarah Longwell did. I don't like him for incoherent reasons and incoherent reasons. I can't even specify, but everybody knows. I would rather vote for somebody else. Well, okay, fine. But the two people running are Biden and Trump. Donald Trump, insurrectionist Trump, fraud Trump, going to be convicted in court Trump. Yeah. What are you going to do? How are you going to vote?
But they'll probably be upset and vote for Biden. We hope.
That's what I would think.
But now they have the freedom
and I don't
to
think
say,
they're
no,
going to vote for Cornel West because of that.
Oh, what about RFK Jr.?
No, he's going to take from Republicans.
Okay. What about Cat Turd 2 from Twitter?
I don't know that he's running.
No. Okay.
Is Cat Turd 2 running?
I'm not. I don't think so. I was astonished.
That's a great Twitter name. One of the all-time great Twitter names.
It is. What did I say? Where did it come from? Oh, Elon Musk must have been, retweeting people. But somehow we had occasion to observe. Wow, as you've lived long enough to see the RFK initials juxtaposed alongside Cat Turd 2 as a source of, valid information informing the mind of Elon Musk. He was recommending everybody listen to them about God knows what. But all right.
Now, here's another interesting piece, which is a slightly different angle on the angst/vibe situation, which I think is, well worth trying to understand, and I certainly don't understand it. This is from the editorial board, and it's an interview with an economist. Are Americans really that negative about the economy? GDP grew by nearly 5% last quarter. There was great economic news last week. And people are feeling it, according to a senior economic analyst for Malden Economics. They have the name economics in it, so the guy must be an expert.
Smucker's Economics.
Exactly. We hit the sweet spot every time. It's by now conventional wisdom that the American economy is doing pretty good, but that most Americans aren't feeling it. Housing prices are too high, et cetera, et cetera. Blockbuster report shows real GDP grew at an annual rate of 4.9% in quarter three, blowing even optimistic expectations out of the water, wrote University of Michigan economist Justin Wolfers. This economy is going gangbusters, and it's time for the recession doomers to apologize for being consistently wrong.
Yeah, bust
and again, it was just a year ago saying 100% recession inevitable.
Oh, right, of course.
Well, it's not a recession. We're having 5% growth. And what's frustrating is people saying, well, we're in a recession now. What?
Oh, what? Yeah, how so?
We aren't in a recession now. Why do you say that? Because I heard it on Fox News, so we're in a recession, so therefore Biden's going to lose the election. What?
I guess you can try saying it. And
you can try saying it, but that doesn't make it true. So this particular economist writes, despite all this demonstrable good news, consumers are about as negative about the economy today as they were during stretches of the Great Recession, Catherine Rampell at the Post wrote. It's almost enough to despair. Economy growing, unemployment at record lows, inequality shrinking, crime falling, domestic manufacturing renaissance.
Cats and dogs,
living together in peace. Biden's approval levels are at historic lows, wrote Volt's publisher Dave Roberts. Sometimes it's hard not to think we deserve the fascism that's headed our way. Now, Volt's, V-O-L-T-A-S, is published by David Roberts, who focuses on environmental issues, which is to be distinguished from Bolt's, B-O-L-T-S, which is a different magazine, published by Daniel Echanian, which concentrates on electoral issues, including at local level, like sheriff. They're both wonderful magazines that just happen to be different.
And the Chevy
but when you say it fast,
Bolt,
the way I speak fast from a New Yorker point of view, Volts and Bolts sound very similar.
They do. I get confused about that and the Chevy electric vehicle as well.
That's Bolts, yeah. So that would be David Roberts.
Okay.
But the thing is, while most Americans say they're down on the economy, they're feeling the gains of growth. According to Patrick Watson. He's the senior economic analyst for Malden Economics.
I know them.
A newsletter.
From a minute ago.
Yeah. In an interview with the editorial board, Watson says lots of survey data says people are feeling it. They mostly feel good about their own situation, but think the country's in terrible shape. You're familiar with this phenomenon. Ask anybody about their congressman versus Congress. Congress sucks, but my guy's good.
Okay.
Everybody says that. Everybody says every other congressman sucks, but my guy's good, except in Santos's district, and especially in Bob Menendez's district.
Yes, but he's a senator, so it doesn't count.
Yeah. Well, his district is New Jersey. But, the idea is, everybody else sucks, but my representative's good.
Okay.
So the editorial board says the economy grew at nearly 5% last quarter. That's huge. President will say Bidenomics is working. Anything to that? And Watson says, yeah, I think Bidenomics is working. Other things are happening, too. The giant force behind all this is a labor shortage. It's raising wages and giving workers more spending power. And again, I should mention, it looks like the UAW is going to win a strike against all three, has to be ratified.
Hey.
But remember, Biden was taking a risk by getting on that picket line.
And he's going to go
3 for 3. And if the workers get 23, 24% raises, I blame Joe Biden.
Yes. He was terrible the way he took that risk and won. Why? How dare he? You're supposed to lose.
So why don't you feel good about the president? Because he's old.
Yeah.
Because I keep reading that.
Right.
So again, just as you want people to say, well, maybe your congressman sucks, change your congressman.
Right.
Because you're right about Congress. Sometimes the conventional wisdom is wrong. And you look at it and you say, well, yeah, and I feel the same way about Joe Biden. Well, why don't you take the same approach to Joe Biden that you do with your congressman? Because grumble. And so the grumble election is really, tough to counter because it's not really based on any specific. It's based on vibes. So how does this growth spurt compare to others? Justin Wolfers called it gangbusters. I trust he's right, but what do I know? I don't write a newsletter with economics in it, therefore I'm not an expert.
How can I know? Yeah, all right, well, he's hedging.
And Watson says, well, here's the data. And then he gives the data. And so there's an image above with data in it.
Wow.
The percent change from preceding quarter, like last quarter, was fantastic compared to the last year and a half. And they've all been positive. So really haven't had bad growth since second quarter 2022. Everything else has actually been quite good. So how do you reconcile all of this? Was talk of a recession overblown? Well, there are big changes, so I try not to blame people for missing them. The Ukraine war popped up as a big curveball and sent energy prices soaring. Things might be different if Manchin had stopped the infrastructure bill, but he didn't. The pieces fell into place. Recession will come, but for now, we're in a good place economically. 100%. I wouldn't expect more crazy good quarters like this one. I think in the future we'll see smaller swings, mild recessions, moderate expansions, but poor policy choices could change this, as could things like social disorder and climate change. Those are the big worries. But right now, and I hesitate to say it because it's unpopular, maybe Biden's managing the economy pretty well.
Oh, no.
He's planning for the future.
Say it.
The economic situation is good. Individual wealth in individual households is doing okay. Your own personal situation is doing okay. It's everything else you hear about that makes you upset and think things aren't good. But that's wrong. So part of it is the insidious nature of Fox News and now Twitter in terms of misinformation. And part of it is, but I'm just not focusing on that. I have other things to do, and I really don't want to pay attention to the election. I just like to blame somebody.
Okay.
And if you can't give me somebody to blame, I'll invent them.
That makes it easy.
Maybe we can go back to blaming our usual suspects.
Oh.
And I won't quote them because it's sort of nasty and hateful and hurtful. But failing that, because it's 2023 and I want to be modern, well, I'll just blame Biden.
Okay. Witches. It will be very popular next couple of days.
Yeah, they could do witches.
Yeah, I guess so.
But don't say it too loud because Mike Johnson will pass a law.
He's talking about witches. Burn him for talking about it. Yeah. But not me because I'm just pointing at who to burn.
Anyway, that's what I got for today.
Okay. That will do. A report from listener Athena 5000, always following along, who's in the Hampton Roads area of Virginia, assuring us that abortion is a very big issue there, too. That's the other place there are people in Virginia.
Hampton Roads.
They're talking about abortion, too. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Hampton Roads is obviously a very important area. And, that whole area of Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads, has a lot of military input, too.
Right. Yes, and they're probably also not crazy about Tommy Tuberville there, now that you mention it. And wondering, not only are we talking about abortion, but we're also getting another, they're in our face about Republicans are going to make problem about this issue. And
now, this is not a national election, it's a state election, but all that stuff matters. And so we'll see. Look, you can lead a voter to the polls, but you can't make him vote the way you want.
Right. But you can disqualify his vote if he doesn't.
Well, you can try, and then illegally kick him off if you're a Democrat, and then not put him back on, which is what Youngkin's done.
Right. Yes, that's in the news again too. And a quiet voter roll purge. They remind you every year, check to make sure you're on the voter rolls. You might
That's
think
the advantage of voting early. You can check and fix it.
That's right. So yes, that's true. And I got a couple of pieces I can share about that one. Even if you have to drive to the place
where you have to vote, and it's a pain in the neck.
Yeah.
Well, there's more places open now, right?
Right. Yes. Now the places that are open are much closer.
And early vote is through Saturday offices. And then stops.
Mm-hmm. And so
not my state, but I like to keep track. We love Virginia. We love people in Virginia.
It reminds me that I'm supposed to go.
We love specific people in Virginia, especially.
Yeah. And
like your listener from Hampton Roads, for example.
That's right. You too. I should let you know that the earliest voter of our test population right here in KITM headquarters, if you were worried that the kid who was always late for the bus was going to be late to vote, he was the first one out. However, just to put a special twist on it, he was late in registering by 2 days, so he had to cast a provisional ballot in order to do it.
Same concept there.
But hey, the vote was cast.
He's consistent any way you look at it.
That's right. Okay.
Hey, you know who else was an early voter in Virginia?
No, I do not know.
Anthony Blinken.
Oh, Blinken, you'll miss him. He's voting early.
I think he voted over the weekend when the weather was nice, so probably Saturday.
Oh, yeah.
And, if he's kind of busy doing stuff, but he's not too busy to vote.
Okay.
Right, if that's true for him, it's true for all of you out there.
Yes, and a good reminder, and as we tell people, I guess, now in the neighborhood, when they knock on your doors, they say, if you vote, we'll find out about it, and it'll go on our databases, and we won't knock on your door anymore. Oh, now that's a benefit. Now you're talking my language, right? Well, we don't have to mail you any more material. We don't have to knock on your door anymore. Please go vote and get yourself off the haven't voted yet list.
Right. You know what we haven't talked about, and we'll save it for the last 30 seconds because that's all it's worth? Dean Phillips.
Okay.
Now, do you know what's happening in New Hampshire?
Everybody's in the legislature.
Yeah, but they used to go first in the Democratic primary stuff.
Okay.
And now they're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so do they actually have any delegates? Are they part of the process?
Well, yeah, right. Why wouldn't they be?
Well, because if you insist on going first against Democratic
are they
rules,
insisting?
I don't know.
Oh, well, then I definitely don't know the
what
answer.
I'm saying is everybody should check out what's going on in New Hampshire in terms of its importance to the Democratic nomination before worrying about what Dean Phillips what his impact is going to be in New Hampshire. Biden's not running in New Hampshire.
Okay.
Because of all of this mess.
So they haven't settled when they're going to go? Is that what?
I'm not sure. I have to go back and look at that. Why is Biden not running? I think that they in New Hampshire are sort of at odds about what's going on there.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
So if it's not that important in terms of who's going to select who the nominee is, who cares what Dean Phillips is going to do in New Hampshire? And Dean Phillips is only running in New Hampshire because he's too late to run anywhere else. What I'm trying to say is that it is such a non-entity. The only people who are really interested in it are board reporters.
Yes. Well, I guess that's who he's really speaking to here, is the reporters. And I guess if they continue going to New Hampshire, he should go there too?
These are the same people
who
think that everything is terrible and Biden is old, and I'm going to keep telling you about it.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's why he's going to see them. It's like what's happening is New Hampshire is turning into a diner full of reporters who think Biden is too old, and Dean Phillips is...
And if you want to find him, go to New
sit
Hampshire.
With him. Yeah, I guess so. I don't know where else to go, but that's a good question. We should check back in and find out, when are they going? We should know this.
Well, January 23rd is the Democratic Party primary.
All right. Well, hey, time for you to go now, Greg, unless you want to hang out. Greg suddenly realized, oh my God, we come back from the break. If I stay here, I'm gonna have to come up with more stories. So I better run out the back door and get ready to answer the trick or treaters. But he did find the answer, or at least one hint as to what's happening in New Hampshire. It just has not been on my radar at all, and I don't usually spend a great deal of time on that aspect of things. But when it becomes a fight about delegates and who counts and who doesn't and things like that, then we tune in a little bit more. So let's see. Biden will not be on the New Hampshire primary ballot at all. Okay, so what's happened, as I understand it, now we filled in some of the blanks in the memory over the break. So New Hampshire was always the first in the nation primary, and then there was the Iowa caucuses, and they went first, but we got rid of the caucuses. The Democrats, right? Didn't they drop the caucuses in Iowa? And then the decision was, all right, well, we dropped the caucuses as first because caucusing was just a bad idea to begin with. Did we get rid of that? I can't even remember. All right. But anyway, it's no longer first. And then they said, well, although they're primaries rather than caucuses, and that's good, New Hampshire is just a tiny little state, and the demographics are, not really representative, and we want a different state to go first. And I think the decision was to make South Carolina the first official primary. So the Democratic Party nationally, Greg was explaining to me, said, well, all right, so we want South Carolina to be the first one. And if you are stubborn and say, we're always first and we're going to stay first, and you have the power to do that as a state party, is to say, well, we're going to hold this primary before, one, before February when they're supposed to be slotted to go, and two, before South Carolina, because we love going first. At which point the National Party can say, we can't stop you from going through the exercise, but we can say that if you hold your primary before this date, then it's not official. We don't accept the results and you won't get any delegates from it. So that's the way you can punish them. So that's what's there in the offing. And as Greg was theorizing, what might happen is they may say, all right, well, we'll hold the primary, but if, so Dean Phillips, he's a congressman from Minnesota, and he's decided all of a sudden he's going to challenge Biden for the nomination. I don't think anybody, thinks anything's coming of it. He's not a famous guy. He's starting from way behind. But, no one else has jumped in of note, or no one who's an elected official. And I guess if you concentrate on this weirdness, or you say, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring in New Hampshire, and then everybody says, oh, but that's controversial because New Hampshire, South Carolina, delegates, no delegates, right? You might not get anywhere, because even if you win, you might not be entitled to any delegates. And Greg was saying, here's how they'll settle it. If Biden wins New Hampshire, regardless, and there's a note here that says Biden will not be on the ballot even. So I guess as part of his, I'm going to follow the rules thing, they say, well, if you're going to have your election, your primary in January, and it's going to be breaking DNC rules, then I won't even be on the ballot, which I guess increases the chance that Dean Phillips could win it, because people will go to the polls and say, hey, there's only one guy. Okay. And I'm a Democrat and I'll vote for him. But on the other hand, I guess if there was ever a situation where there would be more writing in going on and actually have an impact, chances are almost everybody who's going to vote in the Democratic primary in New Hampshire is aware that the president is Joe Biden and that he's running for re-election. Not everyone will necessarily vote for him, but it'll be difficult to convince the vast majority of them that they cannot vote for Joe Biden because he's not on the ballot. That's it. This is the list. That's all there is. No writing in, etc. So we're not going to. So I don't know what they're going to do, although it is a big pain in the butt. I've never written in a name, and I guess, New Hampshire, they're pretty sophisticated voters. There's only 12 or 15 people in the state, and they can tell everybody, and they can have enough pencils. So, they could make a write-in thing work. But anyway, so Dean Phillips is going to run there. And despite the fact that it may never work, it is a way to get everybody to talk about Dean Phillips. Dean Phillips, do you know anything about that guy? I never heard of him in my life. Oh, isn't he the guy who's running in New Hampshire, even though he's not allowed to, or New Hampshire's not supposed to be holding their primary, or they held it, and the only name on the ballot was Dean Phillips, and all the news people will be covering it all over the place. Like that. We have to go to Dixville Notch and see who they voted for. Why, it's Dean Phillips, even though, and they'll explain why it may or may not matter, may or may not count, but they'll say the name Dean Phillips a lot. And I guess that's the point. So anyway, Greg sends me NBC News report that says the headline of which Biden will not be on the New Hampshire primary ballot. And then it stops because they ran out of space to tell me what is this election. Biden's campaign told state officials that it is complying with the Democratic National Committee's effort to make South Carolina the first official contest in the cycle. He's, of course, got that luxury. There's not a whole lot of delegates in New Hampshire. Small place, relatively speaking. And pretty good bet that most people have heard of Joe Biden. Who are most Democratic primary voters in other states will have heard of Joe Biden, and the fact that he'll start out behind after New Hampshire, which doesn't even count, which is also a boost, makes very little difference to him. So he can afford to not be on the ballot. Dean Phillips, I don't know what he can afford, but anyway, it may not be worth anything in terms of delegates, but he'll get lots of publicity out of it instead, and maybe that's enough for him. What else did Greg send me? There's more about this. Let's see. Republicans watch eagerly as Phillips adds to Biden woes. I don't think that that's actually a woe of any kind, but then a grab from these articles here. Let's see. The DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee sent out guidance on Tuesday advising Democratic campaigns to refrain from filing to be on the primary ballot in New Hampshire. A source familiar with the event said the DNC released a plan this year to make South Carolina the first primary, following Biden's recommendation, overtaking Iowa and New Hampshire. But New Hampshire law requires the state to hold the country's first primary. So that'll be interesting. You're all under arrest for not holding the state's first primary. I guess, that's a law that's easily fixed, repealed, whatever, and it was obviously passed as a point of pride at some point. I don't think, is there any penalty, where the whole state is under arrest? This is a state where this could happen. First, they'll call a meeting of the state legislature, and then they'll lock the doors and arrest everybody. It's easy. But okay, don't look for anybody, don't believe anybody falling back on the excuse. Well, it's the law, we have to. Well, yeah, but who gets in trouble if you don't? Nobody, right? So, in accordance with this guidance, Biden for president will refrain from submitting a declaration of candidacy for the primary ahead of Friday's filing deadline for the primary, Rodriguez wrote. Who's Rodriguez? I don't know. Go read The Hill. I guess is this where this excerpt is being taken from? That's the previous link provided. Okay. So, let's see. We read this part. New Hampshire has not set its primary date yet. That's interesting. Where does that come from? If the filing deadline is Friday, why is the filing deadline Friday if you don't have a primary date yet? I don't know. Scanlon, whoever that is, said it will be announced sometime after the filing period. What have you got this backwards? Anyway, even though Biden's name will not be on the primary ballot, his campaign manager said she expects it will appear in a general election ballot in November of 2024. That's not a problem. Consistent with the New Hampshire's law and the Secretary of State's guidance, the president looks forward to having his name on the New Hampshire general election ballot as the nominee for the Democratic Party after officially securing the nomination at the 2024 Democratic National Convention, where he will tirelessly campaign to earn every single vote in the Granite State next November, Rodriguez wrote. Okay. It's fine. Greg is noting that the Secretary of State is Republican. It shouldn't make any difference, really. Well, one, it shouldn't make any difference whether the Secretary of State is Republican or not. They might want to keep him off the ballot, but you don't have to be on the primary ballot in New Hampshire in order to be on the general election ballot in New Hampshire, or any state for that matter. Why would that be? I guess maybe people confuse the two or something. Well, how could you be on the general election ballot if you didn't even run for the nomination in New Hampshire? Well, why not? It's the national party that handles the nomination. If you don't show up in New Hampshire and you're not on the ballot, but then you campaign everywhere else, win enough delegates, win the nomination, the Democratic National Committee is then asked by the Secretary of State of New Hampshire, who's your guy on the ballot? And the answer is Hillary Clinton. She's not a guy, but, okay. This time it is a guy. Joe Biden is the answer. All right. Well, you didn't campaign here. Yeah, who cares? Suppose he had campaigned there and lost. You still can win the general election nomination and be on the ballot, right? So put me on. There's no problem. Okay. Well, that's who Scanlon was anyway, I guess. Scanlon is a Republican. Is that right? Is that what you're saying? And he's not doing anything in any of this. He's saying that he was quoted. He was the guy that said that sometime after the filing period, New Hampshire will come up with its primary date. Now that is interesting. I guess if the Secretary of State is Republican and the law in New Hampshire says that you have to be first, but the Democratic National Committee asks New Hampshire Democrats to move the primary, I wonder if even if Democrats in New Hampshire reluctantly were willing to say yes to that, we're going to listen to the Democratic National Committee, do what they say, and move our primary, can the Republican Secretary of State say, no, the law says it has to be, and make trouble for their state's Democrats that way? That's an interesting question. And then I guess you would have to want to parse out, did state Democrats attempt to, or desire to be in compliance with the Democratic National Committee and have a February primary, but the evil Republican Secretary of State forced them to do it in January? You might be able to plead your case. It's happened before. Long-time political observers will recall we've had these fights before, and in 2008 there was a big giant battle between the Hillary Clinton folks and the Barack Obama folks over who's entitled to delegates from where based on similar fights. So it has happened in the past that delegates that weren't supposed to count, wasn't it Michigan in 2008? Delegates that weren't supposed to count because of something rules, the dates that were decided upon for their primary election dates, etc. Going into it, the rules were that they weren't going to count. And then when push came to shove and they needed these delegates in order to validate the nomination for, in this case, Barack Obama, well, okay. So, I mean, he won the nomination elsewhere without Michigan's, it was Michigan, wasn't it? Without Michigan's delegates. But now that the fight is over and he's going to be the nominee, and a bunch of Michigan Democrats who are going to be important to the general election are about to show up at the convention, and you're about to tell them only half of you can get in. Wasn't this basically the situation? I hope I'm remembering it correctly. And basically it was like, well, what if we just say, since the nomination was determined already anyway, why don't we let them in and let them vote and let them have the full delegate experience and not send them away embittered and embarrassed into the general election? But the rules said, and now you're changing rules. Yes, but we're not changing the outcome. We're changing the rules after the outcome has been determined. Are we going to tell people that they can't be part of the big party and have a good time and come in and hear speeches that will get them charged up to go back to Michigan and work very hard for the election of the Democratic nominee? We really shouldn't. Yeah, you're right. Viewed that way, okay, I see what you're saying, and I think that's my recollection of things. But if Armando calls in a fury, we'll straighten out the record if necessary, because he was highly involved in that and following that fight at the very least. And so it's a question of, well, the rules said you knew what you were doing when you went into it. It's your own fault if you alienate half of the delegation from Michigan. It's really the fault of the state level Democrats there who refused to follow the Democratic National Committee's rules. Yes, but they're going to take it out on Barack Obama, not the state leaders. Oh, well, okay. So maybe we make an exception this time. And maybe they make an exception just the same for New Hampshire. They all are Dean Phillips delegates, but it's now been 9 months since anybody heard Dean Phillips's name. Should we let him into the party and allow them the opportunity to say, I came here for Dean Phillips, but I'm going to go home and campaign for Joe Biden? Sure. I guess if it looks like no, they're going to go in and they're going to make a problem and they're going to protest and they're going to go home and support only Dean Phillips, then maybe they don't let him in. We'll see what the situation is. All right. It's a year away, more, less, I don't know. Well, how does time work? We don't really know. Okay, so we'll move on to other subjects. I mentioned to you that, yes, Youngkin is purging the voter rolls here in Virginia, and I have a current, like today, news article, and I'm sure somewhere in here I put aside a thing that basically said, hey, Youngkin is purging voting rolls and nobody's paying attention. And nobody was paying attention, except now somebody is paying attention because there's a new article saying, hello, I've heard you. So what do we have from the Washington Post? Today's article. We might as well read through and take a quick look at what's going on here. Laura Vozella writes this one for the Washington Post from yesterday, Sunday's Post. Glenn Youngkin's elections team has admitted. They've admitted it. Aha! They have admitted in the run-up to pivotal General Assembly elections, where the delegates get elected to the General Assembly and the senators, but okay, that it removed nearly 3,400 qualified voters from the state's rolls, far higher than the administration's previous estimate. They were asked, how many did you remove? 270, they said. Well, actually, 1,000 times more. Well, actually, more than 1,000 times more, or, well, 100 times more, I guess. How many? Let's see, 1,000? 270 times 10 is 2,700. 27, yeah, so, okay, 10 times more than 10 times more, but a million times more. Okay. Does that make it sound appropriately bad? A lot more. 270? No, 3,400. Elections officials under Youngkin acknowledged what it called the mistaken, removal of about 3,400 voters in a news release on Friday. So again, this is people who are qualified to vote, who were just expunged from the rolls by mistake. Maybe. But, okay. The other article I have somewhere is, but what are they doing about it? And the answer is nothing. If you can believe it. What a mystery. I can't believe that they're not doing anything about it. This is 5 weeks after early voting began, by the way. They're now acknowledging this. For the November 7th General Assembly elections. The outcome will determine the viability of Youngkin's last-minute presidential prospects. I don't know about that. And the fate of his conservative legislative agenda, which includes banning most abortions after 15 weeks. They're talking about it. The news release claimed that local registrars had already reinstated all but approximately 100 of the voters, all of whom had been convicted of felonies, had their voting rights restored, and then went on to violate the terms of their probation. Is that right? That's the 100? The state's computer software had erroneously counted the probation violations as new felonies that disqualified them from voting, administration officials have said. Okay, was it that? But it's still not clear. Is that the 100 that they're talking about, or is that the 3,400 number? Administration officials were initially dismissive of the problem when public radio station VPM first identified it in September. But they announced in early October that about 270 voters had been mistakenly removed. Even that smaller number, though, was enough to prompt Democratic Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine of Virginia to seek a federal investigation. In a letter, they urged U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, remember him, to probe whether the administration's purge violated the Voting Rights Act. Now, the 3,400 figure has heightened those concerns. Although that number represents a tiny fraction of the state's nearly 6 million registered voters, control of the state House and Senate could come down to a handful of very tight races. More broadly, Democrats say the administration's shifting accounts cast doubt on the intentions and competence of Youngkin, who won the governorship 2 years ago, promising to bring election integrity and business world management savvy to state government. So how is it that you're making so many mistakes? They're not mistakes. I've called it weaponizing incompetence. Aaron Mukherjee, maybe, if I've got the name pronounced correctly, voter protection director for the Democratic Party in Virginia, said on Sunday. First, they said it was not a problem at all. Then they said it was a small, very contained problem. And now we've learned it's a massive problem. I think it goes to the point that this administration can't be trusted with the voting rights of Virginians. Youngkin's spokeswoman Macaulay Porter directed questions to the Elections Department, which said in its news release that it worked diligently with state police to review and check each canceled record to ensure all impacted voters are reinstated. Lynn McDermott, Youngkin's Secretary of Administration, defended the governor's intentions in a letter sent last week to Mary Bauer, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Virginia, which had sought information about the voter removals. Governor Youngkin believes that every eligible Virginian should exercise his or her right to vote unless we stop you. McDermott wrote, adding that the governor was deeply concerned, like Susan Collins, about the errant removals, according to a copy of the letter posted by VPM. Youngkin has asked the state's inspector general to investigate the removals, as well as the administration's preliminary findings that an unknown number of people who'd had their rights restored may have been allowed to stay on the rolls in the past after subsequent felony convictions, the letter said. Virginia is one of a handful of states that limits voting access after a felony conviction. The Commonwealth permanently disenfranchises those guilty of violent or nonviolent felonies unless the governor restores their civil rights. Youngkin's three immediate predecessors, one Republican, two Democrats, took steps to automatically restore rights in at least some cases once their sentences were complete. Youngkin has reverted to a stricter policy, requiring each person to file an application that the administration considers on a case-by-case basis with no publicly disclosed criteria. That's not great. Youngkin's elections department announced late last year it had discovered 10,588 people on the state's voter rolls who were ineligible to vote because of felony convictions. At the time, elections officials said they'd uncovered a flaw in the state's aging elections software, one that allowed people who'd committed a felony, had their voting rights restored, and then committed a subsequent felony to remain on the rolls. The original software code written under a previous administration did not account for the possibility that voters who regained their voting rights might later be convicted of a new felony, Youngkin administration officials said. I could see, programming things back in the day. Well, they're not going to go out and do it again. Well, they might. Anyway, once the code was updated, however, the system failed to distinguish between probation violations committed by restored voters and entirely new felonies. Youngkin's elections team has drawn scrutiny for other problems, including major backlogs in processing motor voter registrations in October of 22, just ahead of midterm congressional elections. Oh, so they just mysteriously decided to drag their feet in the run-up to the November 2022 midterm elections. All these people registered to vote at the Motor Vehicles Department. Yes, we got them. We're just entering them into the system very slowly. It's not our fault. The keys on the keyboard are broken. Sure. Okay. The Elections Department belatedly sent 2 batches of motor voter registration applications to local registrars for last-minute processing. 107,000 in the first batch and 149,000 in the second. Wow. The department blamed computer problems with the state's long-troubled voter registration system, which is known as VERIS, V-E-R-I-S, and dates to about 2007. In May, Youngkin pulled Virginia out of ERIC. Remember that one? The Electronic Registration Information Center, the interstate database that actually helps identify people who are registered in multiple states or who otherwise might be reasonably credibly accused of possible voter registration fraud. And of course, they don't really want to find and do anything about it. They just want to be able to claim that it's out there and they don't know enough about how it's happening to stop it. I'm powerless to stop it. So the only solution is throw out all votes where Democrats win. That seems to be their preferred solution. So Youngkin pulled out of ERIC, a data sharing group that red and blue states alike relied on for the past decade to keep voter rolls updated before election deniers made it the focus of criticism. Virginia has been a founding member of the group under Republican Governor Robert F. McDonnell, who you may remember accepting what everybody was pretty sure was a bunch of bribes from political supporters until, for some reason, the Supreme Court, where Clarence Thomas was busy accepting the same bribes, decided that doesn't constitute bribery anymore. You're free to go. Just a little extra commentary I threw in the end of this one, and it's not in Laura Vozella's article, but I'm sure she's aware of it. It just was tangential to what she was reporting on. All right, let's see. Now, somewhere, if I scroll down, I'll find, maybe even from Bolt's magazine, the story about Youngkin not doing anything, dragging his feet, about reinstating people who were supposed to be on the voter rolls. But I see I've gotten to the end of the list here, and it says something went wrong on Pocket, and I'm going to have to reload everything and see if I can find it now. Let's see. I scroll down to where we stopped. It's loading more items. It's going to take a while to think about this. Dang. Okay. Well, I don't know how long I'm going to have to wait in order for it to decide that it remembers what the rest of my list is. And I hope it remembers soon, because there's actually, like, I always wondered about whether it would be a fun and interesting show to go back and say, let's go to all the articles that have still remained in Pocket unused over the years and see if we missed anything major. But, okay, well, here we go. So let's see if they're loaded. Here we are. Yeah, it is Bolts Mag. So how do you like that? As we head into the next break, I'll give you a taste for what they had on tap for us back on October 17th, when Alex Burness wrote, "I don't think they care." That was a quote from somebody. "I don't think they care, Virginia is slow walking the fix to a wrongful voter purge. With elections just weeks away, state officials admitted improperly removing some people from the voter rolls. Local advocates say the state is doing too little, too late to remedy the harm." And, this would be, I think, the second instance of reported slow walking under the Youngkin administration of mistakenly purged voters here. And this one, speaking to one currently going on, not just the motor voter fix from 2022. And it's a long read, and so we're not going to get through it. Certainly not before we get to the end of this music. But I recommend it to you. One, because long reads are great. Two, Bolts Magazine, great people doing excellent work. So I don't know. We'll skim it over the next 2 minutes and see if there are any fun anecdotes to pull out of there. Otherwise, on to bigger things. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, I faced the classic dilemma. This is relative to the other things that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. Maybe minutia, I don't know, but I also feel like I don't love the idea of leaving it with the Washington Post's reporting a week later or 2 weeks later, when Bolts was on the subject earlier and trying to, wave around and get everybody's attention for it, and they didn't get attention for it, and then the Washington Post gets the read instead of Bolts. Plus, Bolts goes into detail about the stories of individual voters, which I think also helps put a finer point on things, helps us understand what it is to have this happen to you, what it looks like, what it feels like, etc. But before I do that, and this is too bad, because I also, there's like 10,000 things that a lightning round would be really good for. Maybe we can get to it, maybe we won't. I don't know how long this read is really going to be. We will try and figure it out. But 1 second here as I return to the next note from Athena 5000, listening from down in the Hampton Roads area, and informing us that, yes, abortion very much an issue for them too. But also, she says, I had to share this with you. I live in a predominantly black area, and we got this from a Republican. So it looks like photos of the mail, mailers that came in. Oh, they're on their side. So I'm going to turn the laptop on its side so I can take a look. You need to reorient these pictures. I can reorient them on my end by turning my laptop over. Very carefully edited by placing a piece of blank paper, or the envelope, I guess, over, I don't know, what appears to be maybe the address and the name. Some personalizing information is here, and well done to block that out. Photo of Malcolm X, and let's see. This is what they're getting from the Republicans. The white liberal is the worst enemy to America and the worst enemy to the black man. As Malcolm X is herein quoted as saying, with a photo of him, I believe, saying something different, but it's not entirely out of keeping with where Malcolm X might have been at the time. And I guess invoked now as a, well, see, you should be voting Republicans because it's white liberals are the worst enemy of worst enemy to America and to the black man. Maybe not taking into contemplation exactly, well, or for different reasons, right? Well, the white liberal is the enemy because they try to convince you that they're friendly or at least open to friendliness, whereas the white conservative is openly hostile and we know what to do with them. I see the thinking. But of course, these are Republicans telling you that. So anyway, what else have we sent here? I guess this is the flip side of the card here. Dear friend, my name is Matt Waters. Probably not a friend either. I am a conservative Christian running for the House delegate in Newport News. What Malcolm X said about white liberals or Democrats is 100% correct. Malcolm X condemned Democrats because their policies have hurt blacks. Democrats promise freedom, but in the end, it's more of the same old, same old. No school choices, unsafe communities, and diminished economic opportunities. I agree with Malcolm X. The Democrats have failed black Americans, says Matt Waters. He goes on at some length here. I guess we ought to, check in on Matt Waters and see what he's all about. I'm just sort of curious. And, of course, this would work a lot better if he's a black Republican than if, say, he's a white Republican. But there's no photo on the piece, so it might not, make sense. Well, I've seen a photo now, and there's some cases where you say, well, be careful who you declare black and who isn't. It matters how they identify, although sometimes people identify incorrectly. I would guess he identifies as white because I identify him as white. We might not be in agreement, but okay, let's see. Matt Waters, let's see. The Republican candidate running for House delegate in seat 70 in Newport News, Virginia. Father of 5, married 25 years, CEO of a political consulting company based in Washington, D.C., not Hampton Roads, that was founded in 2008. Native, though, of Newport News, born and raised, then moved to Northern Virginia, which is going to endear him to everybody. Let's see, where I received my BA from George Mason University and my MA from Reformed Theological Seminary. So, huge Malcolm X fan, I guess, from an early age. And, and look, and he invokes Malcolm X even on, in his interview with local powerhouse television station WAVY. Let's see. What is the most important issue facing Virginia? He's asked. Something. Malcolm X, he's in there twice. So he, in this one, he says, my biggest issue, cost of K through 12 education and the outcome of K through 12 education. Et cetera, et cetera. My position is we need to prioritize getting education right. In the words of Malcolm X, by any means necessary. That is a unnecessary invocation of Malcolm X. That is very interesting. And not really, I don't think, generally speaking, what he had in mind when he made those comments, but okay. He's trying to emphasize the urgency with which he approaches the education issue in Virginia by any means necessary. Okay. Well, he's very intent on getting his Malcolm X fandom on the record. And it's there's a significant number of black voters in Hampton Roads. They're smarter than that and likely to see that as ridiculous as Athena did, but there you have it. Okay, well, thank you for bringing that to our attention. That's funny, and we'll all have to watch very carefully to see what happens in District 70 as white Northern Virginia Republican political consultant comes riding circuit down in Hampton Roads and quoting Malcolm X as the reason why you should cross over and vote for him. It'll be interesting. Okay, so as I said, I want to give some credit to Bolts and Alex Burness for their coverage of the voter purge conducted under the, Youngkin administration and give you the fuller story the way they reported it just a little earlier than everybody else. It begins this way. Elizabeth Shelton was shocked when in late 2022, she got a letter from her county registrar saying that she had lost the right to vote. She learned that Virginia was purging her from voter rolls on the grounds that she had been convicted of a new felony. Although it's interesting, they sent her a letter. A lot of times they don't. But Shelton knew this was wrong. While she has a felony in her past, Virginia's then Democratic governor restored her voting rights in 2021. And she had no new convictions since. So, like, what the F, right? I was like, this isn't right. I had my rights restored. And I've already been voting. I shouldn't be getting this letter, she recalls. Now, the reason I felt it was important to come and read this article too, this here is the point, right? I think she's right. Her voting rights were restored. She was wrongfully purged. The Youngkin administration says, oh yeah, we acknowledge that now. You were wrongfully purged. We're going to restore you. And then they slow walk the restoration. We all understand that. But here comes the real point. So I was like, this isn't right. I had my rights restored. I shouldn't be getting this letter. Still, she dared not participate when this summer's primary elections rolled around in June. I knew it was illegal if I voted, that I could be criminally charged, she told Bolts. I was worried they would try to come after me. So what did they do? They sent an incorrect, oops, we made a mistake. We purged you from the rolls, but we sent you a letter. Like you thought, oh, well, that's unusual. They usually, why send them a letter? Why not simply surprise them in November when they show up to vote? Hey, you're not on the rolls, and now you have to vote a provisional ballot, and we might try to exclude it on various, but why notify her in plenty of time so that she can actually, take action and rectify it? Well, for one thing, if she does take action and rectifies it, we can slow walk the rectification, and whoops, by November, gee whiz, we just didn't get around to it. Computer error. But more to the point, what if giving you that letter just makes you say, oh my God, I could be arrested. I mean, they're wrong about this, but I'm not going to risk it right now. I'm going to stay home. Granted, it was only the primary, but who knows how long, I'm sure that there's somebody out there who said, I'm also going to, I'm just not going anymore. I don't want to get arrested. I can't go back to jail. One vote won't matter. I'm not going to go. And that times 1,000, that times 3,000, 4,000, 100,000 with the motor voter people, right? It starts to make a real difference. And wasn't that really the point of all this? Just get people to stay home, even if it doesn't work. Eventually they get themselves back on the rolls, but this time around, they don't vote. I'll take it. And for somebody who's only limited to one term in governorship anyway, what does he care about the future of the Republican Party? Right now, it helps. It makes me look like I'm turning Virginia red again, and that'll boost my presidential prospects, even if they eventually do fix this problem. Anyway, so there you go. She stayed home. She was worried she would be arrested. She finally was vindicated in early October when Youngkin's administration acknowledged a major error. But was she vindicated? We found out she was right, but did she get her vote back? No. She didn't get justice. Her position was vindicated, but she wasn't. Anyway, they acknowledged a major error. It had incorrectly marked some Virginians as receiving a new felony conviction that they've never actually received, instructing local officials to remove them from their voter rolls. Virginia disenfranchises people when they are convicted of a new felony, and Youngkin this year made it much harder to regain those rights, it is noted here. The state's admission, first reported by Virginia Public Media, that was VPM, that we heard about in the last article, has triggered an outcry among voting rights groups and state Democrats. And by the way, nice there, right? Like Washington Post, I was reading you that story saying, I know I read this in Bolts first, and Bolts, now getting credit for having written about it first, says what? The story came originally from VPM, Virginia Public Media. That made much clearer by Bolts, curiously enough, than by the Washington Post. Virginia's maybe they said first reported by and I just glossed over it. I don't remember. That's possible. Anyway, Virginia's 2 U.S. senators, as you know, have called for a federal investigation into this. Even after Virginia's delayed acknowledgement, it took the state 2 additional weeks to reinstate Shelton onto voter rolls. She found out Monday when she checked her voter registration status on the state's site. Remember, this is from back on October 17th. Shelton says neither state officials nor her county registrar have reached out to tell her she's been reinstated. They sent her a letter to say she was out, but they didn't send her a letter saying we fixed it. I haven't heard anything from anyone. I just happened to be checking online. If I wasn't checking, I wouldn't have known, and I would have kept on assuming I was denied. And that, too, probably part of the plan. And at each stage, they do the right thing eventually so they can say, hey, I didn't do anything wrong. I did the right thing. It's not my fault that there were delays. It was computers and this and that and the other thing. I did fix it. Yeah, but, curiously, you told her she was out, but she didn't notify her that she was back in. But she was back in. That's really the point, right? No harm, no foul. Yeah. Well, I don't think so. Anyway, there is little time before Virginia's November 7th elections, which will decide control of the legislature and other offices, local offices. Half of the early voting period is over, and the deadline to ask for a vote by mail looms next week. That would be this week, I think, already. Voting rights advocates warn that Virginia is doing too little too late to stave off confusion and correct its costly mistake in the lead up to Election Day. They say they don't even know how many people the state has reinstated so far. We know how many they purged. Oh, we're fixing it. How are you doing on that? Oh, I don't actually know. Oh, we got 1. We are fixing it. We're in the process of fixing it. 1 out of the 3,700 has been restored. That's in the process. Anyway, they don't know how many people they've reinstated so far and how many remain improperly purged, although the Washington Post piece says that they're down to about 100. So that gives us some idea, if that's true and correct. They've put a number on it. We don't know how to evaluate the number, but they've put a number on it. Anyway, so that's an update from this article. They are very tight-lipped about what they're doing now, how this happened, and how they're going to rectify it, says Sheba Williams, who helps formerly incarcerated people regain their rights as the founder of the Richmond-based nonprofit No Left, get it? No Left Turns. No Left Turns. But that's the name of it. NOLEF space turns. Okay. I don't think they care. That's the issue. They do care. They care about doing it slowly. Even if Virginia restores everyone on the rolls, the confusion sparked by the error would be hard to walk back in such a short amount of time, weirdly enough, if officials are not proactively reaching out to voters, which they're not. And Williams explains that it's difficult for outside groups to step in. It's really hard to pinpoint who's been removed and how to do outreach for people who have been removed, she says, right? Where's your list of removed people? Well, it's blank because they've been removed. So how do you figure out who did it or who's been removed and how to reach them? The Virginia Department of Elections told Bolts that it was working with the Virginia State Police to identify the people incorrectly booted from voter rolls, and that once it had those names, it would notify local election officials to reinstate them with no action needed on the part of those whose rights were wrongly denied. But, well, for one thing, I don't know how enthusiastic the Virginia State Police are about doing this. But for another thing, Andrea Gaines, a spokesperson for the Department of Elections, specified no timeline for this correction, which is weird because they're big on deadlines and timelines usually. Macaulay Porter, the Youngkin spokesperson, similarly told Bolts that the governor had, quote, ordered a review, but provided no sense of timing. Neither responded to follow-up questions about the timeline and how the state intends to reach out to wrongly purged voters. The state's explanation, relayed by Gaines, is that the mistake is due to a data classification error on a database maintained by the Virginia State Police, who they asked to fix things. The police share this database with election officials, who then consult it to determine who to remove from the voter rolls. Gaines says the police wrongly recorded people who violated the conditions of their probation as having a new felony conviction. This would be a problem because voters are supposed to lose their voting rights over a new conviction, but not over probation violations, which can occur over events like a failed urine test or a missed appointment, which is pretty minor stuff. You might wonder, why are the Virginia State Police maintaining this? And I guess it probably makes passing sense to some people. Well, a database on who's committed crimes. The police would have such a database. Yes, but this is interpretation of the data. This would probably be better administered by courts or elections officials, even though they can make mistakes too. But it's just a strange way to involve the Virginia State Police in voting rights in a way that, well, I guess they haven't done a very good job of up to now. Anyway, Youngkin's administration has minimized the issue's scope. Elections Commissioner Susan Beals told the Washington Post this month that the state wrongly purged at least 270 people, and that number was not expected to grow much higher upon further review, but voting rights advocates worry that the problem is much larger, and indeed it turned out to be the case. They point to a Department of Elections report released last month in which the agency touted that it removed more than 10,000 people from voter rolls between September 2022 and August 2023. These were individuals who had their rights restored following a felony conviction and then were convicted of a new felony and were not subsequently removed from the voter list, the report said. Released weeks before the officials admitted an error, the report immediately raised alarm bells among voting rights groups worried about that this purge was too aggressive. Virginia Public Media reported in September. So there's been some weirdness in every stage of this. The same groups are now skeptical that only 270 people were affected, given the revelation that state police were classifying probation violations as new felonies. Galen Bauman, a Virginian who was wrongly disenfranchised in the same way as Shelton and who advocates for criminal justice reforms, said he suspects the state's estimate is but the tip of the iceberg, an analysis echoed by politicians and attorneys who spoke with Bolts. Thousands of Virginians violate their probation each year. According to state data, Virginia State Police spokesperson Corinne Geller told Bolts that the police database that records probation violations, the database that the state says is responsible for the wrongful disenfranchisement, does not pick and choose which violations it records and refers to elections officials. Youngkin's spokesperson did not answer Bolt's question about how they reached the estimate of 270. But I guess if their system doesn't differentiate, it's not the right system to be using. And really, the state police should just not be this close to voting enforcement. It should be a civilian procedure, quite honestly. Anyway, questions also remain about why the state coded probation violations as new felonies in the first place. Bolts talked to Geller, the police spokesperson, in mid-September before the Youngkin administration admitted the error and attributed it to her agency. Geller said her office hadn't recently changed anything about how its database records information. Our portion of this picture is just that we maintain the database, she said. As far as who's determining rights lost, rights gained, rights restored, that's all under the Department of Elections. Yeah, and so they should have the data, too. They're the ones interpreting it. The suspicions of voting rights advocates are deepened by other policies that the Youngkin administration has pursued this year to drastically tighten the rights of Virginians with felony convictions. He announced in March that he was rescinding his predecessor's executive policy of automatically restoring people's voting rights when they leave prison. This made Virginia the only state to enforce a lifetime of disenfranchisement on anyone with a felony conviction absent a discretionary decision by the governor. Tennessee, by the way, has since joined Virginia. Youngkin's decision barred voters voting for thousands of Virginians who have been released from prison during his governorship and would have had their rights restored under the policy he ended, Bolts reported, before the June primaries. It also led to widespread confusion for many Virginians whose rights had already been restored by Youngkin's predecessors. Still, his announcement only applied going forward, as he could not strip voting rights already restored by past governors. Okay, that's something, at least. In June, I'm sure he tried, Bauman walked confidently into Swanson Middle School in the northern Virginia city of Arlington to cast his vote. His voting rights were restored in 2021 by Governor Northam, and he had made a point to vote in every election since, trying to be a good citizen. This is the worst part about the voting rights restoration foot dragging, is that people are like, okay, I will reintegrate myself into society and be a solid citizen. No, you won't, and if you try, we'll make you an unsolid citizen by definition all over again. Well, it says he follows local politics closely, and on that day at Swanson, he was excited to weigh in on the local sheriff and prosecutor contests, among others. Bauman was shocked when poll workers could not locate his name on the voter rolls, and even more so when the precinct chief informed him he'd been removed from those rolls. He cast a provisional ballot, which he later learned was never counted. left the school and started to investigate why this had happened. Although provisional ballots sometimes aren't counted not because of who you are and what you've done, but because the contest was decided overwhelmingly already by a larger margin than the number of provisional ballots there are. And I don't know whether they just count them as a routine thing or whether they say it cannot change the outcome, so we just won't even bother counting them. But anyway, Bauman got a judge to issue an order in July saying that he should be reinstated on the voter rolls. And still, it took months longer for the Youngkin administration to acknowledge that his and other residents' exclusions were the result of a systematic error. Gee whiz, I can't understand why they took their time with this. The fact that it took somebody in my position to figure this out, it suggests to me that this problem is way bigger than we realize, Bauman told Bolts. He is a white man with professional ties to criminal justice organizations that work on court and legal issues. Too often, the people that are impacted by these problems are too marginalized to be able to do anything about them. And that's the hope, I think, on the part of Republicans. Shelton suspects that the erroneous exclusions that were exposed this fall go hand in hand with Youngkin's policy announcement this spring. After all, the report in which the state congratulated itself for purging over 10,000 people with felony convictions comes from the same agency that has implemented the governor's decision to tighten voter eligibility. I think Youngkin has cultivated a culture of marginalizing people and really putting a negative face on reformed criminals, Shelton said. I just think personally that this is malicious, and this is with every intent to keep away voices that are not aligned with Governor Youngkin. Bauman has little confidence as he watches the officials who ignored his cries over the summer now helming the crisis response. There are a lot of people who could have stepped up and chose not to, who chose the easy, bureaucratic thing, Bauman said. I'm very leery of having those same people now fix the problem. Local elections officials don't seem to have a clear plan either. When Bolts talked last week to Kathy Davenport, Northumberland County's registrar, who heads the office in charge of voter registration where Elizabeth Shelton lives, she said she was only vaguely aware of the scandal. How could you not be right on top of it, right? The state had not notified her of any county resident wrongly stripped of voting rights, she said. In a follow-up call on Monday after Shelton learned her voting rights were reinstated, Davenport declined to detail how her office is addressing this and how it would reach out to wronged voters, telling Bolts to call the state instead, even though the state is the problem. Thalia Simpson, a spokesperson for the Prince William County Office of Elections, initially told Bolts that it may cause unnecessary panic for her office to reach out to people to inform them that they were affected by an erroneous purge. That's an excuse. Simpson called back shortly after to say her office would actually mail letters to any county residents affected by the illegal purge. The burden of correction has fallen completely on our office, she said. It's where it belongs. Voting rights advocates in Virginia want the state to reach out to voters as promptly as possible. Or I guess I should say it is where it would belong if everything was working correctly. But I could see a situation where if they realize that the burden is going to fall completely on the local county elections boards, a Republican administration might look and say, here's a Democratic county, complete with a Democratic voter registrar. Let's make the burden of our mistake fall completely on them. I could see that happening too. So that's who should be handling it. But then if you say, not only will we make it their problem, we'll also chronically understaff and underfund them, you could see how you might weaponize that. All right, let's see. Voting rights advocates in Virginia want the state to reach out to voters as promptly as possible. They're the ones that drove the error, after all, right? People may not be checking their status, said Williams, the head of No Left Turns. A lot of people won't check their status until it's time to go vote, if they check at all. That's definitely true. Even if state and local officials correctly identify everyone wronged by the purge and send them all letters, it may not be enough to mitigate the harm. At least some of those affected by this purge received letters from their county registrars informing them that they had lost their voting rights, and advocates are concerned that this did lasting damage, even if they were to now receive a notice correcting the matter. At a bare minimum, somebody should go knock on those doors and say, I'm sorry, and make sure they got the message, Bauman says. A lot of people don't check their mail, and a lot of times mail doesn't get to people. John Sherman, litigation director of Fair Elections Center, a group that promotes voter rights registration, worries that the error will undermine people's trust in government. Many people, if they have a conversation with their local registrar or the Virginia State Police or the Secretary of the Commonwealth, will accept their authority, not contest it, and be intimidated. Most people aren't lawyers, and I guess even if it's correcting the error, if the Virginia State Police show up, maybe you still don't feel super comfortable about the whole situation. And some harm cannot be undone. Bauman, like Shelton, already lost the opportunity to cast a ballot in the primary. Even though I did everything right and made every effort and every opportunity to try to correct this problem, the other side still won by default. My ballot wasn't counted, he said. It was legally cast, and I should have been properly registered, and yet they won. Now he fears he will experience the same frustration next month. Voting is already going on, he said, so the time is now. All right. So, some important and deep background provided to us by Alex Burness of Bolts, just as everybody at Bolts is dedicated to doing. So, I missed out on the opportunity to tell you a bunch of other cool stories, some of which are really fun and weird and wild, and we can spend some time on that tomorrow, or complain that we didn't get to it and push it off until Friday. But I don't know. That's one of the important roles of the show, right? Bring you that deep reporting, especially if it's coming from corners of the media universe where you might not happen across it all that easily. Give credit where credit is due to Bolts Magazine. All right, other things to keep an eye on today. Let me just sneak in this from the Associated Press. Court arguments are set to begin today in the effort to bar Trump from the presidential ballot under the insurrection clause, where it's happening in Colorado. So, we got to wait and see how that comes out, but at least that effort now underway. Speaking of efforts already underway, Justice Putnam comes to you next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy right here on Netroots Radio.
NetrootsRadio.com.
See, I told you Netroots Radio.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, he's got an eye on a bunch of different issues. For instance, in an urgent action Sunday night, Judge Chutkan has heard enough from Trump and has reimposed her gag order. We definitely have to talk about that. On the rest of the menu, here's one example. Boys graduate from high school at a lower rate than girls with lifelong repercussions. Deeply reported story coming up next.